Welcome to Bitcoin Tech Talk. My name is Jimmy Song, and you can always find this newsletter at jimmysong.substack.com to get it in your inbox every Monday at 9 a.m. Central Time. A review of the Fiat Standard Bitcoin Tech Talk issue number 268. Safety Namus just published the follow-up to his popular book on Bitcoin, the Fiat Standard. Having read the book, this is my attempt at giving you an overview so you can decide for yourself whether it's worth picking up. The book is split into three major parts: Fiat Money, Fiat Life, and Fiat Liquidator. The first part of the book is about the current system, Fiat Money. It goes through why we have the financial system that we have today. Safety continues in the tradition of Austrian economists by interpreting historical events in light of economic forces and motivations, starting with the advent of central banking, the Bank of England. He explains how the Bank of England used its lending power to take value from the people who used its currency, particularly in the colonies. He's surprisingly sympathetic to why central banks centralized gold, which eventually led to fiat money. As he explains, gold's salability across space is made much easier through the use of debt instruments. I learned a lot about how controlling the monetary network became such a desirable prize for sovereigns and the struggle that ensued. This section also goes through the boom and bust cycles of credit expansion and contraction and puts them in historical context. Safety then shows how the real levers of international power involve monetary dominance. This was a big light bulb moment for me, as it showed clearly why countries try so hard to get their own currencies adopted by other countries. International politics makes so much more sense when thinking about economic control through the forcible spread of a fiat monetary network. A very useful distinction that I didn't fully understand until reading this section is the difference between money and credit. As Safety points out, the conflation of the two is precisely what makes fiat money work. Credit is a promise in the future that needs collection. Money is what exists now and can be traded. The credit and money conflation is what causes opportunity cost-free debt to become such a major part of economic life. Essentially, everyone that has credit available to them is incentivized to go into debt. This leads into the second part of the book, Fiat Life, which is about the second and third order effects of fiat money, particularly around time preference. I'm sure critics will complain about his analysis of food, science, and energy, but he makes compelling arguments that these have been and continue to be corrupted by fiat money. As he shows, these industries are not free markets, and the economic distortions ultimately serve their fiat funders, not the markets themselves. You may not like his conclusions, but his reasoning is solid and will give you a lot of food for thought. The chapter on fiat states was especially enlightening for me. Safety explains here what international financial institutions do. These are organizations like the World Bank, IMF, and World Trade Organization, which Safety calls the misery industry. As he shows, international development is a way to enforce monetary dominance on third world countries. Safety shows how these international financial institutions hold back the development of underdeveloped countries, largely through monetary means to fund the bureaucratic class. The final part of the book is about Bitcoin and how it will fix many of these distorted markets. The section is remarkably positive because of the hope that it offers. For example, Safety does not expect hyperinflation to be the endgame for the major fiat currencies as Bitcoin takes over. He expects the distorted markets to slowly correct as a result of removing fiat influence. This section also lays out sharp reasoning about proof of work. Safety argues that proof of work is an alternative to political and monetary dominance games which involve expensive wars and violence. He also writes about the possibility of government attack and why Bitcoin will be able to resist it. As Safety explains, we have been conditioned to think that government bans are effective, when historically they haven't been. I really enjoyed the clarity of his economic arguments as they put in words what I had thought before, but with better economic precedents and analogies. Perhaps my only complaint about the book is that it reads a bit like a collected group of blog posts. I found many sentences that sounded almost exactly like what I had read a few chapters earlier. This is perhaps to allow the reader to digest a chapter at a time. That's not necessarily a bad thing, as the book is definitely worth examining multiple times. Overall, I highly recommend this book as it helps readers understand how the current monetary system works. The strategy of comparing fiat money's operation with Bitcoin's hugely enlightens those readers who already know how Bitcoin works, and the historical examples are top notch. So I did finish the Fiat Standard over the weekend, and it was a really good read. I didn't expect to learn as much as I did. There's certainly a lot about sort of like these global monetary organizations like the World Bank and the IMF and the WTO and all those, and how they sort of like have manipulated themselves into being essentially the middleman for the Federal Reserve. So they get funded by the Federal Reserve and basically do quote unquote development in these third world countries, essentially sort of destroying a lot of these economies and creating sort of a dependent bureaucratic class and so on. So that's one thing that was hugely insightful. Lots of other things in there as well. That first whole section is about how the Bank of England came to be and how it took advantage of the colonies and exported inflation because they were colonies, right? Like they had monetary dominance over them, and that ends up being actually almost more important than anything else, than like the resources and so on. This was a large part of Great Britain's or England's hugely successful reign as sort of like the dominant world power. It was this ability to use the colonies in that way, and that continues to happen as Safety argues. It's the world is basically monetarily dominated by the U.S. Everyone else is sort of like a vassal state to the U.S. So really interesting and surprisingly like positive about fiat money, more so than I expected. And I think he admits this in the book several times that he thought it was this bane of evil, but he came to sympathize with it more as the more he wrote the book and the more he studied it, because it does like create this network and that salability across space, and that does have an important factor to it. So highly recommend it. Go get the book. It's like $9 on Amazon for a Kindle and $35 for a hardcover and so on. Definitely worth reading. All right, so let's talk about Bitcoin. Ledger finally has support for PSBT. As part of the upgrade, they've also added Taproot support. The post is great for learning how they made engineering trade-offs given the very constrained environment that ledgers operate in. For example, the RAM on their devices is less than 10,000 bytes. So reading an entire PSBT file into RAM is not an option. The wallet still remains stateless, so clients have to store descriptors and provide them to the wallet by registering them. Overall, the post should give developers a good idea of their architecture and strategy. So, I did learn quite a bit about like how a ledger works and what sort of constraints these hardware wallets generally have. They do have a secure element and things like that, but there's RAM involved and they don't have that much RAM, right? Like you would think like a megabyte of RAM wouldn't be that expensive or whatever, but in a constrained environment where you want to be able to prove things and so on, you don't necessarily have a large RAM, and these devices have been sold already, so you have to sort of figure out how to make it sort of backwards compatible and things like that. So very interesting post. I've been waiting for them to support PSBT. It's great that they're also supporting Taproot. So just wish that they would open source their firmware code and so on. Speaking of which, here's a handy chart of which wallets support sending to BEC32M addresses, which are Taproot. As before with SegWit, progress is incremental. A majority of wallets seem to be able to send to BEC32M addresses, but few are ready to receive to BEC32M or pay to Taproot addresses. As I argued in last week's newsletter, the benefits to users in terms of realistic security threats are enormous, and I expect developers to implement them in the coming year. So, kind of sad that it's a lot of these wallets have had a while to get ready, but they haven't. So we'll see when it actually comes out and so on. But yeah, at least Ledger is starting to support it. I imagine a lot more wallet developers are looking at it right now and working on it as we speak. Richard Meyer shows how SigHash AnyPrev out APO can be used to create covenants. The main idea from the slide deck is that you can put a signature in the Tapleaf script, making it valid for any previous output in a Taproot mass tree. More signatures from that private key wouldn't be available because it was generated using Music2 or some other process which requires coordination between multiple parties. As a result, only the outputs that the signature signed would be available. This is a clever way to do covenants with this single additional sig hash, though I'm not sure how it would fare against the many other proposals. So sig hash AnyPrev out is something that we've been talking about as part of Lightning. That way you can sort of update channels without going on chain and things like that. But you can apparently also use it for covenants, and it's a clever idea. You create the signature for a particular set of outputs, and that's it. And those are the only ways you can spend it, because you sort of combine them earlier using Music2 or something like that, and the keys are separate. That way you can't go and make more signatures. So the signature stays in the Tapleaf, and then you substitute the pub key based on how you want to spend it, and that's the idea. Very clever. All right, Lightning. Kevin Rook predicts that creators getting paid will be the next big use case for Lightning Network. This is a big problem, as the centralized platforms like Facebook, YouTube, and such are not only taking a large portion of the money that would be paid to the creators, but also often censors them for their political opinions. As Kevin correctly points out, this is an obvious fit, since content creators are often really good at marketing and don't necessarily need these platforms to succeed. So Lightning Network and creators seem like a pretty good marriage, and I expect creators to do that. The more they get censored and the more arbitrariness a lot of these platforms display and so on. I mean, you have the really big players in these markets that I think can leave at any time and would bring a large audience with them. So it would be interesting to see if they do the math and see if it makes sense for them to do and still continue to make a lot of money. Bastien Tieturier, I think T-Bast on GitHub, writes about how you can maximize privacy on Lightning. The post goes through channel openings, Lightning Network payments, and pathfinding, and shows at what steps different information is leaked. The post is an excellent compilation of the possible ways in which your information can leak. I hope Lightning Network software can help users understand what may or may not be leaking as they work on their clients. So a lot of people think Lightning, you're doing everything privately. It's not necessarily the case. And he points out different places where your privacy leaks and so on. And this is to get your privacy airtight. I think that it's worth reading for that reason. Nick Farrell argues for using Lightning as a non-KYC way to get Bitcoin. As he points out, so many of the possible ways in which you receive Bitcoin require KYC. These are largely custodial providers, which will take the Bitcoin on your behalf and convert them for you to your local currency. Taking Lightning using your own node allows you to receive non-KYC coins, which can be a boon for privacy. So he's talking about sort of peer-to-peer digital cash and how far along we are on that. Unfortunately, a lot of the ways in which you get Bitcoin require KYC, which I don't like. I don't think he likes, and so on. So he's arguing for Lightning becoming a bigger part of that. LNSMS is a service to get around the ridiculous phone number verification rules. You can pay to receive a one-time SMS message using Lightning. So there are sort of like one-time SMS things, and you can receive SMSs anonymously. They have like one-time use phone numbers and so on. So interesting idea. We'll see if it takes off. economics, engineering, etc. Yanmani has a complete analysis of proof of stake and how it cannot be a consensus mechanism. The post goes through the problem of decentralized consensus and how proof of work elegantly solves this problem by having an objectively costly metric, that of finding a proof of work hash. Proof of stake does not have an objectively costly metric, and consensus disputes cannot be solved without some authority. In other words, proof of stake is a centralized system. Amazing article that needs to be read by everyone who thinks they're being smart by talking about proof of stake. So, proof of work solves this very difficult problem of how do you objectively measure who gets to make the next block. Proof of stake does not solve that problem at all, because you can sign multiple things, and to figure out which one is canonical requires some sort of authority. In other words, it's centralized. And that's what Yanmani is talking about in that post. And the thing is, like, Vitalik Buterin totally admits to this. He just plays with words and, sort of hides this fact under a mountain of proposals or whatever. The guy is a scammer, and proof of stake is a scam. So for those of you that think it's a magic pill to make things better, it's not. It's a way to centralize something. It's a centralized thing. That's it. Marty Bent draws attention to some miners who had their pools attacked via DNS pollution. This is not a normal attack, but it does make sense that something as centralized as DNS could be a possible failure point. To really make these tools more robust, they may have to move towards Tor hidden services and the like to get that extra level of robustness. So there was something called DNS pollution, which is essentially you have a domain which these pools run on. And I guess in China, like F2 Pool and some others had their domains within China only get sort of get poisoned. So it led to some other place rather than their own pool, and their hash rates dropped precipitously. So that's DNS is a centralized single point kind of. So like what you need to do is have Tor hidden services or alternate ways to get onto these pools, which I hope they do. Robert Breedlove shows how inflation is despair in his Bitcoin is Hope series. As he points out, inflation has the opposite effect of hope in that it destroys rather than creates. Breedlove argues that this regresses civilization. The framing is correct and is pitch perfect for the times we live in. More people than ever are feeling this malaise, and I suspect this will result in some huge political consequences in the next few years. So, inflation is despair, Bitcoin is hope. That's the framing around his article, and it really does sort of like drain you of all kinds of things. And if you've read The World of Tomorrow, you can definitely feel that. Paul J. Miller has a thought-provoking article on premature innovation. The post goes all over the place, including rants about unseen effects, El Salvador's legal tender laws, and fragility, but there's a lot of substance there. Essentially, he thinks that there are premature innovations that are fooling a lot of people into thinking that there's something amazing around the corner. It's a sobering reminder that El Salvador may not be the model that everyone copies, and that some other method may need to come into play. So his idea is that, okay, we see the first thing and we sort of project out based on that. That's premature innovation. But that's not necessarily how innovations work. Oftentimes, there's like a start and stop and stuttering and stuff like that. And as he points out, El Salvador is kind of authoritarian, and forcing legal tender laws and things like that is not necessarily the path that we want every country to take, and the path that many countries may not want to take. Tomer Strolight has a follow-up to his very popular post on the problem of Ethereum. In this follow-up, he again distinguishes the different classes of people on Ethereum and concludes that the London hard fork essentially screwed both the worker class miners and the user class so that the wealthy class could benefit. Instead of users paying miners with fees as before, now those fees are just getting burned. As he points out, ETH is just as, if not more, unfair than normal fiat currency. So Tomer is, continuing to show how just sort of like this insider game that Ethereum is. It really is kind of like an MLM or something. Level is planning to make it possible to bank on Bitcoin. Full disclosure, I am an advisor to the company, but I've been pushing for them to go in this direction for a while now. They are aiming to make it possible for you to live on the Bitcoin standard while taking care of your yucky interface to fiat money. If there are as many people that want to live this way as I think, this should be a major hit. So, basically it's a post by the CEO and Chris Slaughter, who talks about their master plan for Bitcoin. For their service and how it's going to support the Bitcoin ecosystem. Essentially, he wants it to make it possible for people to live on a Bitcoin standard, automatically sort of converting Bitcoin to dollars as needed and so on, but keeping your wealth in Bitcoin. Some quick hits. The Bitcoin developer Anthony Ronning explains why he left Twitter. So pretty sobering, and he's like, it's not really good for me, and he left Twitter, but I expect him to continue publishing. Good for him. Ethereum's blockchain is still smaller than Bitcoin's. It's just so horribly designed that running it requires far more resources. So this is based on BitMEX's examination. BitMEX Research, I think, did. And it's, basically their blockchain is still kind of smaller, but you just need to keep an insane amount of state in order to know anything in the past and so on. Don't use your fingerprint as a security measure. This comes from Kraken. You can copy fingerprints for any sort of device in like 5 minutes. Another week, another smart contract suffers from idiocy. This is the constitutional DAO. It just is a big mess right now, and when they're trying to refund people, but all their money is going into fees, which essentially means it gets burned. Not a good situation. Events. I am planning to be in London for the Advancing Bitcoin conference March 3rd and 4th, but there is some possibility I won't be able to get into the UK. I am also going to be at Bitcoin 2022 in Miami April 6th to 8th. I'll be doing programming blockchain seminars in London before the Advancing Bitcoin seminar, and Miami before the Bitcoin 2022 seminar. Some podcasts. This week's Bitcoin Fixes This. I talked to Fred Thiel, CEO of Marathon Digital Holdings. We talked about his path to becoming CEO, how he tries always to add value, and how he prevents his companies from becoming ossified. So go listen to that if you haven't. He's a fountain of wisdom. Read through last week's newsletter, which you can find. I was on the Bitcoin Basics podcast to talk about Taproot. And here's, of course, the new book, Thank God for Bitcoin, which was published a year ago. I am working on another one. My other books are the Little Bitcoin book and Thank God and Programming Bitcoin. Unchained Capital is the sponsor of this newsletter. I am an advisor and proud to be a part of a company that's enhancing security for Bitcoin holders. If you need multi-sig, collaborative custody, or Bitcoin native financial services, learn more at unchained.com. Fiat delenda est. This song is done.